Good morning, my friends, and welcome back to Mike Allen from Chicagoland. It'll be evening by the time I upload this video, but it is a chilly, cold April morning here on the south side of Chicago in the Hyde Park neighborhood. Currently standing in front of the Museum of Science and Industry, a place I have not been to since 1989, so can't wait to head inside and see what type of exhibits this place has to offer. Come and join me and let's get started. Now, this building is one of the last standing from the 1893 Columbian Exposition or 1893 World's Fair. Now, during the fair, it served as the Fine Arts Building, and after the fair ended, it stayed as a museum up until 1920. It was actually the Field Museum for that length of time until it moved up closer to downtown. And then the building reopened in 1933 as the Museum of Science and Industry, and that's what it's been ever since. And an interesting thing about this building is this is the north entrance. It's facing to the north, but the building opened in 1893 for the fair. The main entrance to the building was on the other side, facing the south in Jackson Park, which was where the vast majority of the buildings were for the fair. It looks like these statues have been cleaned up. I remember seeing in a textbook one time when I was a kid a picture of these statues that had been eroding away from air pollution. So glad that they've been able to be fixed up. Inside the transportation section of the museum, and this here talks about engine 999, which had a record-breaking run of 112.5 miles per hour on May 10th, 1893. It was on display at both the World's Fair in 1893, the Columbian Exposition, and the 1933 Century of Progress Fair in Chicago, which took place over on the lakefront. This display shows you how it worked here. Turn this crank and it shows the men having to shovel coal into the furnace constantly to keep the steam engine going. Go up inside the train now. Get a vantage point from the engine room. So this engine was actually in service up until 1952. That's how long the trains were powered by coal. In fact, my great uncle worked in the railroad industry and was around when that switch was made from steam-powered engines to diesel-powered engines. Believe it or not, this is an electric-powered vehicle, the Milburn Model 27L Light Electric from 1923. I've seen cars like this before at other museums. You notice it's got the lever inside. That was what was used to control the vehicle. There's a more modern electric vehicle, the Audi e-tron GT 2022. This is a slick-looking, sporty model. What I thought was most interesting about this display here was this company, Electrify America, their goal of creating charging stations around the country. Very, very similar to a gas pump. I've seen this profiled on other YouTube channels before, the Great Train Story, which is a model of the city of Chicago taking a train to Seattle. So let's check this out. This diamond-shaped building was prominently featured in the movie Adventures in Babysitting. Sears/Willis Tower. This model train even has the CTA Brown Line loop going around the city here. Press to operate the drawbridge. There's Chicago off in that direction here, and the train exhibit continues to a more rural part of America and then off into the mountains. into Seattle. Seattle's harbor and downtown area. Space Needle off in the background. I was actually up in the Space Needle about 20 years ago when I visited Seattle for the first time. And I think that building down there is supposed to be the Pop Culture Museum. Place I have not visited but want to someday. I don't know why, but this kind of gives me some vibes of the old Great Movie Ride. It used to be a Disney's Hollywood Studios before Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway took over that building. Old school mailbox next to this makeshift post office here. Storefront advertising women's dresses. Store for men's clothing. These outfits look pretty circa 1920s. Something out of that TV show Boardwalk Empire. Berghoff restaurant, which I'm not sure is still in business, but one time it was a pretty famous restaurant in Chicago. In front of the Jewel Tea Company, general store, fruits, vegetables, cheese. Advertisement for a Cadillac. There's a display of one of the first Walgreen drug company locations. Looks like it's got the soda fountain inside there, along with a bunch of other items here on display. Yeah, there's the soda fountain off in the background there, right next to this cash register. Whitman's candy box. And over here is where the pharmacist would get the pills and drugs and antibiotics ready for his customers. And this is the back of the building I was talking about earlier, which used to be the front entrance to this building. Can't go out these doors, but thought maybe we can get a peek at Jackson Park. A small peek at Jackson Park. Imagine looking out these doors back in 1893. You'd see nothing but buildings from the World's Fair. There's engine 999 looking down from the top floor now, but I am interested in going and checking out this Boeing 727. Let's head inside. There's some very cramped quarters for the pilot, co-pilot, and flight engineer. Yeah, you don't really see three-person flight crews anymore on planes like this because the flight engineer is really no longer needed due to advances in technology. Back in 1964, for the Boeing 727, he was needed. Air travel in the 1960s, people were allowed to smoke. There's the flight attendant galley, some coffee, wine, more coffee and wine, as well as an old school looking Coca-Cola can. There's a plain view of engine 999. I hate flying because of the lack of leg room, but I could definitely get used to this right here. Yeah, quite a bit of leg room here in first class. Currently sitting on a wing viewing seat here. Another view of engine 999. There's a whole host of other reasons why I don't like to fly that I won't get into, but I'd rather just get in a car and drive. That way you can see a lot more places here in this great country. Allows you to stop. You have control of the vehicle. When you fly, you don't have control of pretty much anything. I guess that's probably the biggest reason that I dislike flying, the lack of control. Big old jet airliner. Don't carry me too far away. There's a video of how they got the Boeing 727 inside the museum back in 1993. It's like they had to take it apart piece by piece and slowly but gradually get it inside the building. There's a replica of the Wright brothers' very first aircraft, which on December 17th, 1903, brothers had made 4 short flights at Kitty Hawk. Very fascinating stuff here. I always thought it was pretty fascinating that the gentleman had to lay down while flying this contraption. It's ironic that I don't like to fly, but absolutely fascinated in the Wright brothers and the history of aviation and how it came about. So here's a replica of the engine that the Wright brothers used in 1903. It had 4 cylinders, cast aluminum block, and steel flywheel, which is right over here. So it turned out this flyer that I was just looking at is called the Spirit of Glen Ellen. And it's an exact replica of the 1903 flyer, and it took off exactly 100 years after the Wright brothers did. Here's another vantage point of the 727, right next to the wing here, with the flaps going up and down. Some information about the Picard gondola, named after Auguste and Jean Picard, no relation to Jean-Luc. So it was a high altitude balloon that set altitude records. It was the first to supply pressurized oxygen above 40,000 feet. Inside the storm section now, and this here is a tornado vortex that is being generated right here inside the museum. This exhibit talks about string waves and how energy moves through the rope to create these types of patterns. This machine simulates tsunami waves hitting the shore right up over there. So this here is a dart buoy, which was part of an international network of buoys to help find tsunamis and warn the general public before the tsunami were to hit land. Now this particular one broke free of its chains and washed ashore in the Kodiak Islands, about 400 miles from where it was originally stationed. It's now since been retired and sits right here in the museum. Circular wheel simulates an avalanche in motion. This is a bunch of just grains of sand and small shards of glass showing what an avalanche looks like in real time. Inside the automobile section now, and this is a 1908 Stoddard Dayton, company that went out of business in 1913, but they were known for being a luxury vehicle with speed. So 1971 Aston Martin. Of course, it wouldn't be an Aston Martin without the steering wheel on the wrong side of the car. This one is the 1913 Mercedes Knight, and it's called that because the engine was designed by Arthur Knight, who was an American designing an engine for a German company. The 1930 Franklin. Looks like something straight out of Prohibition era. I just love looking at these old Model Ts. This one was from 1914. And of course it was in black because that's all Mr. Ford gave to his consumers. Last thing I wanted to check out before heading out the door is this replica of the lunar lander from the Apollo missions. One thing I wanted to point out is how light this vehicle is, and it had to be in order to land and then take off again. There's the crew living quarters while they were on the moon, and that was the part of the ship that would take off when leaving the moon. And here's the ladder that Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin would have come down to come and land on the moon. See if we can get a closer look inside the module here. Can't imagine how the Apollo 13 astronauts had to live in this thing for several days while they used it as a life raft to get home. Here's a model of a SpaceX Falcon 9 rocket, which is being used to carry crew up to the space station. This here is the actual command module from Apollo 8. Jim Lovell of Apollo 13 fame, part of that mission. Not a lot of room in there. There's some cramped quarters for 3 people. What made Apollo 8 so famous was that these were the first people to ever orbit the moon. It was the farthest that any human being had ever gone out into space prior to Apollo 13. There's a picture of the crew of Apollo 8, William Anders, Jim Lovell, and Frank Borman. There's a replica of the Saturn V rocket, which was used to carry the astronauts on the Apollo moon missions. It's standing next to the space shuttle. Difference in height here. The Atlas and Titan rockets are dwarfs compared to the Saturn V. These are the rockets that carried the Mercury and Gemini astronauts into space, which ultimately kicked off the space program for the United States. And this here is the Aurora 7 from the Mercury mission, actually used and actually flown by NASA. It's the second of the United States aircrafts to orbit the Earth. And let's get a look inside the spacecraft here. Only fit one person and not a lot of room. That's a lot of gadgets and gizmos and knobs to have to figure out before you get in one of these things. And it wouldn't be a Chicago museum without a Mold-A-Rama with old Honest Abe himself. Heading down the escalator to exit this very busy Museum of Science and Industry. So thank you for joining me through this journey through the Museum of Science and Industry. Had a great time, and I hope you enjoyed watching it. If you wouldn't mind hitting that like and subscribe button, I would greatly appreciate it. There's other ways you can help me out in growing the channel. I'll put links down in the description below. Anyways, this is Mike Allen from Chicagoland, signing off from the south side of Chicago and Hyde Park. I'll be back next week with another video, but until then, don't you go changing.